Hi, my name is Alex Locust, and I am the one and the only amputee. I am open to all pronouns. I primarily use he and him, but open to any said with respect. I'm going to model some access, do a landing acknowledgement, and then let's jump into this keynote. For access, I'll provide an audio description of myself. I am a light skinned black biracial babe serving curly, luscious mane, mustache, scruff, fur. I've got my glittery purple claws out today and reporting to you live from my pink paradise. Additionally, my access needs for today, I'm seated, which is one of my favorite activities. I've got a beverage if I need it. Otherwise, my access needs are met. And lastly, I want to acknowledge that I'm zooming to you from San Francisco, California, which is on unceded Ohlone Ramaytush land. I'm thrilled to be here. I think let's just put it out there. This is wild. And I could go on more about myself, give a bigger introduction to who I am, right? Some of you might be wondering, what in the hell is a glamputee? Or why are his walls a delightful shade of Pepto-Bismol pink? And those are all great questions that I'm not going to answer right now. I don't want to spend up too much time talking about me when we have some juicy things to talk about. Besides, I like to joke as a millennial and a Leo at that. It's my sworn duty to leave a considerable digital footprint. So if you want to know more about Claim Beauty, I promise, for better or for worse, it's one Google away. Just clickety clack on that keyboard. You can find podcasts, YouTube videos, articles, my Instagram. It's out there, right? I am paying Daddy Squarespace those annual fees. So please do not hesitate to give my website a little peek if you want to know more about my personal life. But grounding in the focus of today and the summit, this is really, I'm just beside myself, right? Reflecting on my experience as a queer person. This is my 10-year coming out anniversary, right? 10 years queer. Ew. When I think back about who I was in high school, right, having a complicated relationship with my sexual identity, my gender identity, my gender expression, right? I can't even remember if we had a GSA in our high school. Right? I do want to give a shout out to the current GSA at Susquehanna. Gabe tells me you all are shining right now, so thank you for your work. And in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there was no physical LGBT center. So when I think about growing up in that environment, I know a huge factor of why I struggled with my queer identity was because of a stark lack of community and a culture utterly devoid of possibility models of queer people thriving and living a high quality of life. I have to give my love to Gabe for being an early pioneer in my life, coming out so young and boldly living their truth in the face of others' confusion, fragility, closed mindedness, and bigotry and hatred. Gabe's willingness to explore the expansiveness of their identities and embodiment then gave me permission to do the same in a way that I'll forever be grateful for. I literally would not be here right now without your bravery and courage, Gabe. So thank you from the bottom of my gay ass heart. So let's get into it, right? We've got introductions behind us. Why did I title this keynote "No Body Mind Left Behind: Cultivating Community Through Interdependence and Disability Justice"? Well, when I heard the key theme of this summit was mutual aid, I immediately thought of the Disability Justice Culture Club in the Bay Area. Reading from their bio, DJCC is a collective of disabled and or neurodivergent queer people of color operating out of East Oakland slash Chochenyo Ohlone land. Their organizing efforts center the lives of queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. DJCC consistently demonstrates what mutual aid looks like, notably providing aid to Black and Brown queer disabled folks in the Bay during the California wildfires and offering resources for COVID relief. Clearly in their name, their efforts are rooted in disability justice principles. So before we get further in, for those of you who are unfamiliar with disability justice, what's that about? Just kidding. If you aren't familiar, right, I think it's a high time that I tell you. Let's get on the page together. It's time for a little history lesson. right? Disability justice is an evolution of disability civil rights. The movements that happened in the 1970s, 1990, right, with the 504 protests, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act, exploded people's understanding and awareness of disabled people as social change agents, right? And really paved the way for the pioneers who I'm going to reference today. People like Patty Byrne, Eli Clare, Sebastian Margaret, the late Stacey Park, Leroy Moore, Mia Mingus, mostly Black and brown queer disabled people came together and said, this disability civil rights movement is a start, but it's not what we need, right? It's not addressing the complexities of our identities, and it's not addressing the history of predominantly white and a very specific group of disabled people leading the movement. So I was introduced to disability justice at a Sins Invalid performance in the Bay Area, right? This performing arts group centering the lives of Black and brown queer disabled people, their sexuality. Let me tell you, I was sobbing my way through that entire performance. It was incredible. As a Black, biracial, queer, disabled person, disability justice has felt like the home I've been looking for all my life. It's a framework that's one of the brightest stars in the constellation of theories and perspectives that guides me in my pursuit of justice and liberation. This way of reimagining my anti-oppression lens not only invites more sustainable organizing, but also celebrates my wholeness by integrating all of my identities. For so much of my life, I felt like I've had to pick and choose which identity I was bringing into a space or what would be honored when I showed up there. If it was a gay or queer space, such as a party, a bar, or a club, they're primarily inaccessible and limit the presence of other disabled community members. I felt that erasure, that violence, looking around and recognizing that I'm the only person with an apparent disability in the space. In spaces centering disability, I frequently noticed a centering of whiteness and heteronormativity. Even in movements like the Black Lives Matter, even movements like Black Lives Matter received critique early on for their lack of commitment to accessibility and the lived experiences of Black disabled people. I say all this to say, because of the commitments to an intersectional approach, disability justice is inextricably tied to queer liberation. Drawing from Kimberly Crenshaw's critical work in intersectional analysis, we know that we can't tease apart the oppression of disabled people from queer people. We cannot claim an anti-racist life unless we are also adopting an anti-ableist approach as well. These commitments create the foundation for two key disability justice principles: cross-movement solidarity and collective liberation. Collective liberation makes me think of three quotes that I consider to always be working in concert. For today's purposes, maybe we'll call them the Destiny's Child of collective liberation, or the crystal gems of a more just future for us all. The first being Fannie Lou Hamer's "Nobody's free until we're all free." The second, Audre Lorde, "There's no hierarchy of oppression." And third, from Patty Byrne, "How do we move together where no body, mind is left behind?" So with that quote, right, with no body mind left behind, in typical amputee fashion, I've taken a circuitous route to get to my point and asked more questions than I've given answers. When we think about no body mind being left behind, I've offered history and frameworks, but how do we put this into practice? How do we operationalize it? If you're sensing a pattern, I'm going to reference another disability justice principle to provide the roadmap for this practice. In this case, I'm just going to read Patty Byrne's words directly here, relating to the eighth principle of disability justice, which is interdependence. Quote, "Eighth, we have an awareness of interdependence, as we were taught before the massive colonial project of Western European expansion. The disability rights call for independence pride disabled people from systems of patronage and being spoken for and about, in companion to the ideas of self-determination and community. From this starting point, we can widen and deepen our analysis, as the state was never set up to serve Black and brown people. We can see the liberation of all living systems and the land as integral to the liberation of our own communities, as we all share one planet. We can attempt to meet each other's needs as we build toward liberation without always reaching for state solutions, which inevitably then extends its control further over our lives." Let's just let that soak in for a second. we can attempt to meet each other's needs as we build towards liberation without always reaching for state solutions, which inevitably then extends its control further over our lives. In her wise words, Patty speaks to the way the state was never set up to serve Black and Brown communities. It's fair we can extend that analysis to disabled people, queer and trans people, women and femmes, fat bodies, immigrants, elders, people experiencing homelessness, people who do sex work, people who use drugs. Right? The list could go on. We're seeing in the news over and over white supremacy is condoned with police getting away with murder on camera, committing brutal acts against Black bodies. Trans healthcare is being banned by our government as I speak. Sesta Fosta is an insidious assault on people who do sex work hidden under the guise of protection and support. Healthcare systems have openly created triage practices around COVID safety that devalues the lives of disabled people. The evidence is undeniable. Yet, in light of these atrocities, I witnessed Black people at Reunion in Chicago building virtual community through healing spaces and book clubs. Trans women in San Francisco are leading the creation of a transcultural district. Queer people who do sex work in Portland are using mutual aid practices to make rent during times with heightened risk for their sexual health. And disabled people across the country are affecting change within healthcare systems and vaccination rollouts with the hashtag No Body is Disposable campaign to ensure that we get the medical treatment that we deserve. To close on my solo journey in this keynote, I'm going to leave you with a few reflections on interdependence that I hope will help you consider how to divest from this unsustainable lore of independence and myth that the state is looking out for our best interest. This is a call to orient towards interdependence, a new vision for our future that not only ensures getting our needs met, but also more importantly, cultivates the kind of community able to provide for your needs as a whole person. First and foremost, what are your needs? Are they being met? What stories have you been told about your needs? Have you been told that they're too much, that you're being too needy, that what you're asking for is more than you should be asking for, that your needs are too complex? What do those messages do for you? Right? What does the scarcity mindset do to ensure that everyone's needs are met? What happens when we switch to abundance? What does it feel like when you sit in your body and imagine living in a way that assumes that there are enough resources to meet everyone's needs? There are. Next, what resources do you have? How can you offer support to your community? Are you financially resourced? Are you a deep well of emotional labor? How about, are you artistic? Can you help others make their visions come to reality? Maybe you're a tender chef, right? You could enjoy feeding protesters before or after a demonstration. Are you an Excel wizard, manifesting, organizing magic from home, or a Twitter icon who can get a campaign message out to the masses? Maybe you're a drag artist convening queer community for moments of radical joy in times of crisis and collective pain. Lastly, what does a healthy, liberated, and justice community look like to you? You're at the summit for a reason. What brought you here? What ways can you elevate your work through rooting it in more collective practices, more community-oriented work? How can mutual aid and interdependence facilitate that growth and expansion of your efforts? For my next trick, I'm going to shift from a solo performance to some beautiful duets. As a practice of modeling cultural humility, I will own that while I've witnessed mutual aid practices, I'm still learning about them myself. One of my greatest passions in my role as amputee is to wield my privilege and social power to pass the mic and extend my platform to others in community who are more marginalized. I also love modeling the power of being in conversation, asking questions, being curious, owning my ignorance and biases in a space with others who have consented to exchange and explore in that frame. Borrowing from my Sippin' Saturdays IG Live series, I interviewed two queer gems, Drake and Dolores, about their relationship to queerness and disability, what disability justice means to them, and how mutual aid efforts and interdependence inform their community organizing practices. I want to thank you for your time today and thank you for what you're doing. While I can't be there with you in person, I can feel the energy of all of you as I record this, and it's filling me with hope and excitement for the liberated future that we're building together. You know, to think about my 13-year-old self and what I wish he had had, right? This feels like a love letter to him, and really feels like we're doing some of that queer time travel, corrective emotional experiences that I hope you all can pay forward someday as well. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to the interviews, and I will see you for the live Q&A after. Bye. All right, looks like we're recording. Good morning, Dolores. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I am so thrilled that you're just contributing your time and magic to this keynote. Would you do me the favor of just kind of like introducing yourself, whether it's around like pronouns if you're comfortable, any access needs that I can help support today, modeling, image description for the folks, and then maybe just kind of closing with like, why did you say yes? Why did you want to be a part of a conversation about like mutual aid and interdependence?
Yeah, so my name is Dolores. Thank you for having me. Congratulations on being asked to be the keynote, and for extending that to other folks as well. So my access needs are currently met, and an image description. I am a fat brown Latina. I am wearing a black top with one of the shoulders that's knotted, and a necklace with brass hardware and a headset, and my background is of tea candles and little cups.
So thank you. I appreciate that.
And yeah, and I wanted to do this one because you asked. And I I thought that it was a good opportunity to elevate the work specifically of Disability Justice Culture Club,
Mm,
and also to talk about how people can, as individuals, um, tap into mutual aid and into the kind of opportunities that mutual aid offers. Um, uh, us It offers us to build like relationships and all this other stuff we'll get into. But yeah, I just wanted to speak to that.
yeah, I love that. Well, and you brought in Disability Justice Culture Club. I feel like that's part of the way that I got to be introduced to you and your contributions in the community. Um, I would love to hear your perspective of like what does disability justice mean to you, and how do the concepts of mutual aid and interdependence, how does disability justice inform those efforts?
Yeah. So disability justice is a framework. It's not just a movement. It's not just a an ideology, but it's really a framework on how to operate. Um, it what values um, to live by to reach a just world, to reach equity, to create the world that we want to see. And so two aspects of that, it's multifaceted. But today, speaking specifically to mutual aid, it means recognizing that the state, that society, that capitalism and white supremacy was not created to help us thrive, and thinking um, of a system, of a network on how to fulfill and get our needs met when the current system doesn't meet them. And one of those ways of getting our needs met is through mutual aid, which is not just about having access to the things that we need, but also really relationship building in a way that's important. So it's deeper than just an exchange. It's it's the piece that is about relationships. And so when to me it connects to disability justice because um, it's about making sure that we have what we need to thrive and to live and to exist wholly.
There's so many things that I want to like unpack in what you just shared.
Uh,
I love this. Um, Starting off, you're talking about disability justice as a framework, right? Which I so appreciate that invitation to see it less as like just a movement, right? But also just a way that we can find our own relationship to like liberation, right?
Mhm,
In our body minds, but like collective liberation too.
mhm,
Um, and you're also bringing in this idea of like mutual aid, interdependence. Like these are ways to build community, to build connection, not just to get needs met or be transactional, right? But
Yes.
it's an invitation to like deepen how we're in community together, which I feel like
Mhm.
is so um, so relevant, resonant for like a GSA summit, right? Where we're talking about alliance and community and coalition. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you mentioned a little bit about how some of these systems, right, like white supremacy, ableism, the patriarchy, capitalism, are like
Mhm.
not, set out to help us thrive, right? So how do you find mutual aid and interdependence showing up in your life as a means to like build
Yeah.
connection and community in the face of these systems?
Yeah. So as someone who has like shifting needs and um the capacity to like name what it is that I want. Like I could name them and I could be like, this is what I need to exist in this moment. But it's another thing to feel supported and comfortable, like asking people that I know to help me get there because like one of the first things about mutual aid is it shuts down this notion that white supremacy and capitalism teaches us around um, being self-sufficient or being only like taking care of yourself, like being a singular. It's first acknowledging that you exist as a part of a whole, and so you are whole and you exist as a part of this other bigger whole, right? Um, and so um, I think that uh, the way that it first was about making sure that I like how do I understand myself and what it is that I need, and then it does take I think some like awareness or some work to be able to name what it is that I need to other people. So it's taken me a while to like cultivate the community that I feel like I can rely on and tap into communities that I feel match my principles. And so uh, mutual aid isn't just about like an exchange of anything. It isn't transactional, like you said, right? Because if that was the case, it would be like charity and it would be a repetition of capitalism. It's deeper than that, and being able to name what I need to other people comes from knowing who I am and knowing that I like deserve those things.
Mm,
Did that answer your question?
it does.
Okay.
I hate that I have to be muted, like the car's going by. I don't want to like interrupt your audio, but I'm over here muted. Like, yes, yes, that too, that part. Um, yeah, what you said at the beginning, right, about like kind of this myth that white supremacy and capitalism perpetuate of like independence, right, and just taking care of yourself. I hear often from especially like black and brown people in my life where they encounter people in community, we'll say using that in quotes, right? People who are like allies and like this kind of stuff. And then, we get into crisis mode or someone does have needs, and then it's
Mhm,
like all of a sudden that person's like only looking out for themselves. I had
mhm,
a friend who like during COVID, her washer dryer broke, she needed help, and then a white neighbor like just was like, I'm not willing to like offer you any support. Like you can't use my washer dryer even with like protection and like all of
yeah,
the and it's less about fear around COVID. It was just kind of like not that willingness to be, I don't know, take a small amount of risk to support someone who's in need.
yeah.
So yeah,
And yeah, it's like we have to recognize that um what we lose if we don't support each other in a mutual way, in a way that builds up our own relationships, is that we lose community. So this neighbor now missed an opportunity to get to know someone who who is a part of their neighborhood, is a part of their community. And so when we take the chance to kind of get to know each other and appreciate each other as like whole human beings, there's a lot to learn. And that's kind of the way that is the way that we're going to get to a world without ableism, a world without racism, because um the we need to build these networks and these webs, because if people have their needs met, then that is by nature like anti-capitalist already. That is dismantling all the systems that are making it so that we don't have our needs met now. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm grateful for your presence in my life is the way that you model um, either like your own mutual aid processes or help promote mutual aid for people in your community. Because, like you said, when you show people how to get your needs met, right, or like say what needs you have, it's modeling like that's what we can all ask for.
Mhm.
And so I feel like you're in a way almost like not granting permission, right? But just encouraging me to be like, I should also do that. Like I see you post stuff, I'm like, oh, I didn't even think to ask for that, right? And it's like, why not? It seems like people, when you ask, they meet it, or you find the people who are willing to meet that. And I
Yeah.
just find that to be a really beautiful process to witness.
Yeah, I think it can be hard because we live in a society that operates off of like money. We live under capitalism. There is a fear and there is a lot of um, trauma, because that's what capitalism creates, is trauma around money and the exchange of money. And money is linked to power. So figuring out our relationship to money also is about figuring out our relationship to power. So for me, mutual aid is a way to shift that power dynamic, because um I'm like, okay, this person is resourced in XYZ way. It shows up financially, it shows up um money wise in these ways. I have to be okay recognizing that um they have the opportunity to shift power dynamics, and I have the opportunity to ask. Pretty much, I hate when other people have power over me, so I'm like, "Nah, let's break that down. You're gonna share your money with me now." So I'm like, "Let's level this playing field." Um, and so so that's unfortunately the system that we exist under now. But for me, what I someone asked me, like, "How do you get used to asking people for money?" Um, and when I'm asking for money, it's 90% of the time for other folks. I've fundraised for myself in very specific instances, but I also know that I have my points of privilege through having a job, through having stable housing. So most of the time it's for other people. So the way that I got over any shyness around asking for what I need, or asking what community needs, is I think about what we lose if we don't ask. So if I am supporting someone fundraising and I'm like, yes, I'm going to help you raise money for this project or for basic survival, I tackle my own ego by saying, "What happens if I don't ask? If I don't ask people for money, this person will not eat. This person cannot find can will not have money for a deposit. Um, so this person will not have whatever it is that they need." Um, so that's the big thing for me, is like a way to make sure that we're linking into mutual aid, is like getting rid of our ego and getting rid of um any any anything in our, like, tackling the shame and unlearning the shame that we have around getting our needs met. Like, why wouldn't we feel worthy of surviving, of living? And we know why. We know because we're getting these messages about our supposed value, right? um but being able to say like, no, I deserve to feel supported, I deserve to have my needs met, is radical in this world that we live in. It's it can be the first step to like tackling ableism for disabled folks, for anyone, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, what a beautiful message, right? That you deserve to be supported. You deserve
Mhm,
to have your needs met. It is unfortunate to think that our culture is one where people don't believe that, right? Or have been conditioned to believe that those are radical beliefs.
mhm,
Even the way that I love you using the term resourced, right? Or that framing,
mhm,
right? Because I in my exploration of like anti-capitalism or using disability justice as an invitation around anti-capitalist ways to see unconditional value and worth. It's not just
mhm,
like what you're producing, it's like what are you
mhm,
offering to community,
mhm,
right? So maybe somebody might be resourced financially and could help with like rent or food money, but maybe
mhm.
somebody's resourced in terms of like emotional capacity to do
Right.
like emotional labor. Maybe
Yeah.
they're resourced in terms of creativity to offer as like
Mhm,
a consultant on a project, right? And so
mhm.
when we start to flatten that hierarchy of like money is the most important resource and that
Right.
or production is the most important way to demonstrate being resourced, then I also think maybe like you're saying to divest your ego, like maybe I'm ashamed to ask for money, but then I could be proud about being able to hold space for people.
Mhm,
Or maybe you're like a restorative justice expert or like a
mhm,
transformative justice
mhm,
facilitator. And those are ways to say, like, I can't offer in this way, but I can offer in this way.
mhm.
And that doesn't mean that like your offering is less important because it's not like
Yes.
dollars on
Exactly.
Venmo.
Exactly. Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that's important for people with, um who are resourced less when it comes to under economically, who have less resources in terms of money, to know that there are still other ways to contribute. And also, if you have money, give it away.
I was
Don't
waiting for that.
don't
Yeah.
hoard your wealth.
I to pivot a little bit, well, just again, if you have money, give it away. And also like part of what I was excited to hear from you in this conversation is your relationship to like the intersections in your life of disability and queerness and like
Mhm,
in a conversation for this GSA summit, like how do you see disability and queerness like informing each other in your life?
mhm,
And particularly when we're thinking about movements showing up for each other in this like
mhm.
cross movement solidarity principle of disability justice, like
Yeah,
where are those overlaps shining or like maybe where do you see some gaps that you would invite people to like reflect on?
yeah. So for me, it's like very like connected and overlapping because, well, for one, both deal with the ways that our bodies exist in the world and move through the world, and also the way our bodies are perceived by the outside world. Um, Queerness and disability, uh, in some ways, like both are about like queering the body, both are about how we hold space for ourselves, how we hold space for each other. And um, yeah, so for me, I think that I guess ask the second part of your question because I see the link and then, but there was another piece that I feel like I lost.
Totally. I'm working on I like will ask like a three-part question that's like a full paragraph. So that's my bad.
No,
Um
you're good. You're good.
you named how like you see disability and queerness kind of having a relationship or
Mhm.
overlapping and to bridge it into this idea of cross movement solidarity,
Mhm.
right? Like where do you see the disabled and queer communities showing up for each other?
Mhm.
Where do you see opportunities for growth, right? If we're talking to a predominantly queer community, right? In
Mhm.
this space, what
Mhm.
invitation do you have for them to show up for disability
Yeah.
justice?
Yeah, so just like there are queer people everywhere, there are disabled people everywhere. So and there's going to be queer disabled people amongst that, right? So even even in the spaces that we're in the queer spaces that we're creating, there is bound to be disabled folks there or trying to access that space, trying to access that community. And so the invitation for queer community is the same as it is for the broader world, but I think that queer folks have um, the skill set and the imagination to reach and serve disability community in ways that other people, other communities maybe aren't as ready for, right? So queer people are just like disabled folks, queer people are super innovative. And so we have the capacity, and when I talk about queer people, I'm also talking about people of color, right? I'm specifically speaking to the expansive um community that embodies queerness. So, um, queer folks, just like disabled folks, are super innovative in the way that we are existing and surviving in this world. So it comes from, I mean, it's COVID times right now. So, but we want to think about like what are the things that I can do, or that queer spaces can do to make sure that when that whatever spaces were created are accessible. And that's like a basic access, and like giving people access to spaces is like level 1 type of things. But to go deeper to that, like how are our politics reflecting an anti-ableist ideology? How are we not replicating um, external systems that exclude people from our communities that have every right to be where we are? Um, and again, it goes back to seeing that we are all like um, inherently valuable, and that we all have the right to exist as whole human beings. So recognizing that wholeness means that we are going to acknowledge and make sure that we honor people's disability. And also folks can think about, because we're in a pandemic, and um we're existing in different ways now in different spaces. We can also think about how the spaces that we've been creating, how those have been an opportunity for folks who previously couldn't access it to access it, right? So our community, even though we're like separated in a certain way, our communities are also expanding. So we have to, as queer folks, continue to um push back against the norm and challenge whatever whatever is the norm. And um there is a solidarity for folks who are queer and not disabled, or disabled, yeah, and not disabled, to say like, how do we see each other? How do we see each other pushing back against those norms? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like obviously, a pandemic isn't the way that we would like to like find an entry point to a more just and liberated future, right? There's
Mhm.
been a lot of trauma and like devastation that's come from this, and it seems like a chink in the armor, right? Or like a crack that we can, widen and peek into, right? Like you said, there are these. We're having this conversation on Zoom, right? Like we're a part of this summit in a way that we wouldn't have been if it was just for people showing up in person. And so, how do we not only, like you said, get to the bare minimum of making queer spaces accessible, right? But how do we celebrate disability as a generative force within queer spaces? How do we celebrate like wholeness? Um, if we're fighting for like queer liberation, we can't just clock out at the end of the day, right? Like we need disabled
Yeah.
people to have liberation too,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. And that's part of the disability justice framework that uh is a framework that anyone can and should be using. Is when we center the people who are most impacted by the unjust systems that we exist under, then that means by nature everyone who's least impacted will be able um what's celebrate and reap the benefits of what happens when we achieve collective liberation.
absolutely, yeah, definitely. Like just giving, yeah, paying homage to like Patty Byrne and Sons of Ballad, like all of those amazing Black and brown, like queer, disabled people, like
Mhm.
their work is demonstrating what the experiences of those who are most impacted look like.
Mhm.
And if we, like you said, turn to them, their vision of the future is going to make everything more accessible for everyone, right? It's not
Yeah.
like people will get left out by their vision because of their intimate understanding, right? Being at
Mhm.
I think there's, can't remember who said it, right? That just the sharp end of injustice, right? Like we need to kind of
Mm.
center their needs the most.
Mhm.
Um, we've only got a couple more minutes left, Dolores, and I have two more questions that I want to ask. We can
Mhm.
stick with one if I don't want to rush it because I feel like both are really great. But talking to being at this GSA summit, thinking about talking to folks in high school and college,
Mhm.
I would love to hear from you. Like, do you have any messages for your younger self that you would have wanted them to hear back at that time, just as a way to kind of like reflect on, that growth, right? Or some of this like, that
Yeah.
queer crypt time travel
Yeah.
vibe.
Can we close with that question? Because I wanna think about it a little bit. Okay.
Okay, yeah, totally. So then the other question that I had is shifting away from like self-care questions, right?
Mm,
Because
mhm.
we're talking anti-capitalist, we're talking about
Yeah.
some of these things. I love thinking about pleasure activism from Adrienne Marie Brown, and like for you, what do you feel like helps make movement work feel irresistible for you? How do you like keep coming back to it? Where do you find pleasure that
Yeah.
sustains you in this really challenging work?
Yeah. Um, I think for me, the pleasure in doing this work comes from um, this is the first thing that came to mind was I like telling people when they're wrong. I love being able to and those are when I think of that, I think of, like, people that deserve to, like, be told off, right? And then on the flip side, with people I'm trying to build relationships with and build community with, um, I love building those relationships and learning from each other, and I've had so many conversations with queer disabled folks where they will name something, and I'm like, yeah, like, I know what that means, like, I didn't have the language for it, but you just named something, and then doing the movement work, just being empowered and seeing power people coming into their power, and then on in this way that's like, "Oh, I have this voice," and then the other side of, like, using that voice to then or not the other side, but, like, another extension of that is, like, using that voice to push back against systems that do not serve us. There is so much that's the other version of, like, telling people they're wrong, like, it's telling white supremacy it's wrong, like, so when we're, like, doing collective actions, it's like we are we are pushing back and we are showing that we have power in this way that is greater than the power that they think that they have. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say personally some of my pleasure activism is watching some of your takes on some of these systems, right? Or when inequality is rearing its ugly head, I'm like just loving loving hearing what you have to say.
I love that.
Yeah. How are you feeling about that the question about any
Yes.
messages to your younger self?
Messages to my younger self, I would say, um, you are still shifting and evolving. You are not stagnant. You have more skills than you think, and you have something to offer. Um, and there is community out there for you, and you're gonna love it.
Oh, wow, what a beautiful way to end, Dolores. Thank you so much. I'm like, that's I just so grateful for you, your magic, your energy, your fire. I I've learned something today in this conversation. I feel like I always do every time we get to be in community together like this, and it just means so much that you offer that to the space as well.
Thank you. And I do want to plug Disability Justice Culture Club, DJCC. They're on Facebook. It's one way you people watching can directly start supporting a mutual aid network and supporting people with disabilities.
Yes, yes. Thank you for highlighting their work. Definitely both support them financially if you can, and just help follow them, right? So that
Yeah.
if you're looking for models of what mutual aid and interdependence can look like, we both, have witnessed the um, political actions, right? The incredible movement work that they're doing. So absolutely, um, check out the Disability Justice Culture Club. With that, Dolores, I will wish you a good one. I hope you have a restful Sunday, and I
Thank
can't wait
you.
to be in conversation with you again soon.
Thanks.
Yay!
Bye.